Greetings, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Scott Rodell here at our Great River Talent Center, home to our Academy of Chinese Swordsmanship. I have a really interesting duandao to share with you. It is one of gotta be from a Chinese minority, because as you'll see, the blade is very unusual in its form and also the blade pattern. So let's just jump right into that, because that's the most interesting part. This is not a particularly long piece. It's a 21-inch blade that's 53 centimeters, has an overall length in the scabbard of 27 1/4. So a typical sort of duandao, one that people carry for everyday kind of protection. I mean, as you can see, if I slide it back in the scabbard there, if that's on my hip and I'm going around, I'm going to the tea house, whatever, just round and about town, that's an easy thing to carry around with me, not like carrying a spear or some more effective weapon, but day to day, if I'm somebody of means, somebody who might be robbed, or somebody else wants to show his authority in the community and I want to carry around a sword, something like this is obviously a lot more convenient than a full-in sword. Say something like that big oxtail back there, that's a lot more troublesome to carry about with you. So these are really common during the Qing, especially mid to later Qing. We see quite a lot of these. Going back to the blade, really, I'm tempted to say unique, but I have seen two others. So I can't say it's unique, but it's really unusual. One thing you'll notice, of course, is it has those horse tooth hardened edge. You see those little sort of teeth along the edge there. And that is, of course, to prevent so that when you're cutting with it, if you don't properly deflect with your flat ear blade, or you just happen to catch an edge, happens edge to edge, and you get a nick or you get a chip, it doesn't travel further than that tooth, that shape there. So you see that on Chinese swords. That's fairly rare, but it's really curious to see it on this kind of sword, this duandao, not because it's a duandao, but because when you look more closely at the blade, you'll see that the blade pattern is very reminiscent of Tibetan swords. You can only see 7 layers. Chinese swords are far more layered than that, in hundreds. So definitely not your typical kind of Chinese steel. So it's a weird mix of a kind of steel you typically would see on a Tibetan saber, those straight sabers, straight back sabers. Chinese call that a jirbei dao. And those kind of Tibetan swords has a steel like that, but then has this inserted hardened edge, which the Tibetan swords do not. So it's this curious combination. The other thing that's different about this, almost unique, is this scallop tip. Now I've seen that a few more times, more frequently than I've seen this combination of, so let's call it Tibetan steels, Tibetan type of steel, if you will, with this hardened edge. But again, that's infrequent. And it's not something that, it's really a Chinese kind of design. And it has, I should say, also has these fullers that come up and sweep off the blade here instead of ending the way you typically see on a Chinese saber. So a lot of unusual elements have come together in this little duandao. We don't know, I should say, honestly, right from the beginning, don't know where this is from. Well, we have no, say, photo, some ethnographic photo of some, maybe a traveler from the 19th century or something, maybe even late 18th century, who might have seen this, and photographed it, or done a drawing or something, so we could say, okay, oh, that's from such and such an area. We don't have anything of that kind. So we're stuck with educated guesswork. Given the blade form, given that the steel is similar to Tibetan, but with this Chinese influence, I'm going to say Yunnan province. Down the corner of China there, it's kind of south, it's relatively close to Tibet. The northern part of Yunnan province does have Tibetan people in it. You also have people, about, I forget, I think there's 50 some minorities in Yunnan province. Check me on that number. There's some large groups, but there's a large number of minority people there. Not as many Han people. So that's my educated guess, that this blade is of one of the minority groups. Clearly, it's not your standard Chinese blade. So I wouldn't say this is Han Chinese. This is not, or Imperial Chinese, if you prefer. This is not something that you would expect the Chinese swordsmith to have made during the Qing period. But it's definitely from China. We have it in, it came from China originally. I collected this many years ago. Recently sold it through Seven Stars Trading Company, but I collected this many, many years ago. And it very much came from China. You're going to see, we take a close look at the fittings. Fittings are absolutely Chinese, as are the other examples that I've seen. So certainly from within the borders of the empire, but not from the Han culture. So really curious piece. Like I said, tempted to say unique. Other things that are really interesting about it, let me put it in here. Take a look closely at the fittings, is that the fittings are what the Chinese call baitong, white bronze. That's German silver. It's a common term for it in English. And that is a nickel alloy. So in general, it looks like silver. When it's got a bit of a patina like it does now, it gets a little bit of a yellowish tinge. That's one way you can tell it's not silver, that it's this baitong or German silver. That's nickel alloy. It does clean up quite nicely if you like. If you have one, I would say take it easy on doing that on an antique, but it will look like silver when it's gently polished. This example has a couple of interesting things. One is it's really beautifully engraved. When you look at the fittings here, it's really, really finely engraved. And it's symbols of the eight immortals. So clearly Chinese motif, that's obviously not from any other culture around. So eight immortals. Also, another thing that's really interesting here that I've only seen one other time that I can recall, maybe it's been two, but only one other time I recall, is you see the shape here, right? The shape of the shape. This is a real standard sort of shape design, more or less. Generally, this is called the cloud motif, this shape, this sort of scalloping around here. And of course, it varies a little bit sword to sword, but generally in this sort of form. But here, this shape is quite different. When we look at that shape, I see that shape there. That is, see that shape there. Pommel in the shape of a shape. So I'm saying shape, but that's not the shape. That's the pommel, obviously. But it has this kind of, it's curved around. It's like if you took this piece, shrank it a little bit and stuck it on there. So that's something that we don't see very often. That is, quite interesting to see now and then. So a lot of times, of course, Chinese swords generally do follow a pattern. China's a very old, strong, rich culture. That often means that things stay in a kind of classical pattern. But now and then, somebody does something a little more artistic, sort of flips things around, does things a little different. People often ask the age of a sword. The only way you can really tell that is if I were to disassemble it and take a look at the coloration of the tang. Obviously, you're not going to do that when a piece is solid and in good shape. You're not going to do that. However, if I look at the blade, especially if I look down here at the base of the sword, when you look at that base there, I can see a little bit of dark patina there. The blade, of course, has been polished and restored. It's hard to get that off to really polish it. So that's telling me the blade is likely older. In fact, I'd say it's pretty certain older than the fitting. So at some point, this blade, I believe, was refit in these because these are old fittings, definitely antique, but they're, I might say, crisper. They have a newer feeling. If I check the edges and stuff, they're not sharp like something that's just made, but it's clearly lacking in wear and so on to tell me that it's relatively new, still old, but relatively new compared to the blade. And that happens, of course, throughout history and time. Blades are refit. Sometimes a piece is lost. Sometimes maybe the owner has gone up in status. For whatever reason, they'll take an old blade and remount it. So I hope you've enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed presenting things. I love sharing all these antique pieces with you all. Really share the heritage of Chinese swords and swordsmanship. If you did enjoy it, appreciate your subscription and that thumbs up. Don't forget to hit the bell because we've got new videos coming out all the time. Until next time, thanks everybody and 再见.